And as far as ufology goes, everybody will know this name. Our first guest is Peter Davenport. Peter is the director of the National UFO Reporting Center since 1994. He was born in St. Louis, Missouri, where he lived to the age of 14. As a boy, he attended high school in St. Louis, Ethiopia, and New Hampshire. He received his undergraduate education at Stanford University in California, where he earned a bachelor's degree in both Russian and biology and a translator certification in Russian. His graduate education was completed at the University of Washington in Seattle, where he earned his MS degree in genetics, biochemistry of fish from the College of Fisheries, and an MBA degree in finance and international business from the Graduate School of Business. Peters worked as a college instructor, a commercial fisherman, a Russian translator in the Soviet Union, a fisheries observer aboard Soviet fishing vessels, a flight instructor, flying gliders, and a businessman. He was the founding president of a Seattle-based biotech company, which at one time employed over 300 scientists and technicians. But every time, again, you mention Peter Davenport's name, you're going to come up with UFO. Outside of his professional career, it's been I have been trying to get Peter on the show for a long time. He is a very, very, very busy individual, but he is taking time tonight with us to be here. So without any further delay, let's go ahead and get him on the line. Peter, good evening. Welcome to Fringe Radio, my friend.
Well, good evening, Pat, and thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. Always enjoy talking about UFOs. This may be the first time that I broadcast via shortwave around the world. I've probably done international programs via the Internet. I don't know that I've ever done it off an antenna, though, so this may be a first.
It is, and as you mentioned, you enjoy the same hobby I do. We're both amateur radio operators, have been doing it forever, and it was such it was an honor to be asked to be a part of Global 24 and the audience that it brings all over the world. In the United States, shortwave is coming back. It seemed like it died off for a while, but it's starting to build its way back in again.
Yeah, well, I'm delighted, and since the UFO phenomenon is an international phenomenon, that's what the evidence says strongly to all of us. I'm delighted to have an international audience tonight to listen to some of my observations and yours on the subject of ufology. It's in my opinion, the most compelling subject that faces mankind today, namely, are we alone in this galaxy or are we not? From my vantage point, from where I sit, Pat, the clear and unambiguous answer to that question is no, we are not alone, and it appears to me as though we're being visited on a routine basis. So we'll be talking about all manifestations of that tonight.
And I can't wait. I gave a little bit of, just scratched the surface on your bio, Peter, but how did, let me ask you, you've done some very, very interesting things, without a doubt. You've lived in different parts of the world, worked in different parts of the world with different cultures, I'm sure. How did the whole ufology thing start for you? How did you get involved with that? How did this all come to be?
Yeah, I think I can answer that, and it's going to be the shortest part of my interview tonight, Pat. I can summarize my answer to your question in 2 words: sheer misfortune.
Okay.
But on a more serious vein, I think I suspect the reason I am the director of the National UFO Reporting Center today, and the reason I'm so intrigued by ufology in general, is because of a sighting I had as a young lad. I think it was July of 1954. I was 6.5 years of age at the time and had a very, very dramatic sighting together with 3 members of my family, and literally hundreds, possibly thousands of other people saw the same thing I did. And it has left an imprint in my memory of what I saw, and I've been intrigued by the question of what are these things, been intrigued by that question ever since. So that was the beginning of it. Then in 1965, I had the opportunity to investigate a very dramatic sighting up in New Hampshire, where I had just graduated from high school in June of 1965, We had the incident at Exeter case, very, very dramatic case, and I was working for a local newspaper at the time. The editor came to me. He knew of my interest in UFOs, and he said, "Peter, put your broom down. You're now a cub reporter. I want you to go up to Exeter, New Hampshire, and cover the sighting that occurred up there on the 3rd of September that year." And I've been investigating and talking about the subject ever since, Pat. Well, it is a fascinating subject from my vantage point.
With your first sighting that took place when you were very young, and we'll get into more of this as we kind of talk tonight, but you know, there's so many people claim they see different things. As much as I don't consider myself a ufologist, I have had 2 sightings in my life that I will preface it with this, is that if the craft I saw were of this world, we have got some amazing technology. If they're not of this world, then I saw something off planet, if you will. And I know what I saw was very distinct. With all the people, and I'm sure with the UFO Reporting Society, you get so many different phone calls. There's got to be so many of those cases, though, that the sightings, I should say, that are just so unique, where there's no other explanation. It's not an airplane that's out 30 miles and the lights are flashing, or a weather balloon or a satellite or whatever. What you saw at a very young age, obviously, was something that there was no doubt in your mind was not of this world.
No doubt. It was as big as the moon, a full moon in the night sky. It hovered motionless. And when it accelerated from a dead stop to gone over the horizon, covering about 120 degrees of arc in, I estimate, somewhere between 1 and 3 seconds, like a marble coming out of a slingshot.
Wow.
And in 1954, I'm confident we did not have anything, any kind of hardware that would allow that kind of acceleration. So it was unambiguous, and interestingly, during the sighting, I was in the right-hand seat of a 53 Studebaker at the time. That was our family car, and my father was on the other side of the airport in the control tower of the St. Louis airport, and he was watching it, as were other people in the tower. They were all watching this object with binoculars.
All right, everybody, welcome back to Fringe Radio. Our guest tonight, which we're so honored to have on the show, is Peter Davenport. He is the director of the National UFO Reporting Center. Peter, we were talking right before the commercial about the sighting that you had back in '54, and just writing some notes down here. So your dad was an air traffic controller at the time?
No, he worked for an airline. He was the station manager for a major American airline in St. Louis, and he had a number of friends. Back in the 50s, of course, aviation was vastly different from what it is today, and he used to go over to the terminal, to the air traffic control tower, and just climb up and visit with his friends when he had a few minutes free. So he happened to be in the control tower when this incident occurred, while my mother and my older brother and I were enjoying a drive-in movie on the south side of the airport. And that's when the incident occurred. So all of us were looking at the same object from different vantage points, and we all found it to be immensely intriguing, even disturbing. And I've told that story hundreds of times, but people, if they're interested in seeing how a career in ufology can begin, they can go to our website and look at the data for July of 1954. I'm guessing at the date, Pat, but they can read all of the details of what we saw. And my brother remembers it to this day. He saw it, but not nearly as clearly as I did. He was in the back seat of the car, and it didn't have good windows, so...
Right. Well, and obviously, all these other professionals up in the control tower at the airport. I mean, obviously, everybody saw this.
Oh yeah, people at the drive-in theater were getting out of their cars, slamming their doors. They were ignoring the movie, and they were walking towards the object that hovered in the eastern sky from our vantage point. This is not very far, just a few miles from the now infamous Ferguson, Missouri. So It was a very dramatic sighting, and it stuck with me all these years. And one of the things I see as director of the National UFO Reporting Center is people who've had equally dramatic sightings, even from decades ago, remember what it all looked like vividly, clearly. It seems to leave an imprinted image on the minds of the percipients.
Interesting. How big was this thing, Peter?
Well, from my vantage point, you can't know absolute size unless you know the distance to the object, but its apparent size was roughly equivalent to a full moon in the night sky, and it was slightly oval with its long axis oriented horizontally. It looked somewhat like the CBS symbol, and it was quite prominent. There was no mistaking it, and it was so bright that it hurt to look at it. I remember that part of it. As a youngster, I had very good vision, probably 2015, maybe even 2010. So I got a very good look at it through the side window of our car, but it was a little uncomfortable to look at it. It was so bright, and it was the color of a red stop signal, a red traffic light.
Any noise that we're going back a long time. You were young. Any noise that you could remember?
None that we perceived. It was totally silent. The object may have, I think, it was illuminating the ground, maybe even the entire airport with red light. So it was giving off a great deal of energy, a great deal of visible light, and suddenly it just accelerated and went right over the control tower, or very close to it, and went to the north of McDonnell Aircraft Corporation, which was on the northern periphery of St. Louis Airport at that time.
I know my sighting that I had here, and we've got a caller actually on hold that we're going to bring on in just a second.
Good.
My sighting here, Peter, back in the late '90s. Some people I've told this. Well, obviously all my listeners I've told them about this, but I've drawn the object on paper a dozen times, trying to get the reference point to figure how big it was.
Yeah.
What I saw back in '99 was something the size of probably 5, maybe 6 aircraft carriers in length.
Yeah.
Something that went across the entire valley in a matter of seconds, made absolutely no noise, and my people have asked me about this. They said, well, did it scare you? And it really didn't scare me. What I was afraid of the most is that it was heading from south to north. It actually made a turn out to the west and then headed out to the northwest. Is the jetliners, this was at about 1:15, 1:30 in the morning, but the jetliners that could have hit this thing coming out of Salt Lake City, out of Salt Lake International Airport. Yeah. Just amazing how big it was. Not 1 ounce of noise, but I know that it was huge in size because I was miles away from it, and all I can tell you, and I've told so many people this, is I could feel the air being displaced by its immense size.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like a very interesting sighting. I'd love to really welcome having you sit down sometime and write it all out if you haven't already, and submit a report using our online report form. One of the most difficult parts of my job is trying to get people to recognize that the only way this information will do any good, possible exception being for a radio broadcaster who has a big audience, but the only way it will do any good is if the information is preserved in written form and then posted to a website like ours at the National UFO Reporting Center or others, and would really welcome having that written down and submitted. With regard to the issue of size, this is something I encounter quite often. People try to impute what the absolute measurement of an object is, but unless you know the distance to the object, it's very difficult or even impossible to know its absolute size. All you can do is say, well, its apparent size was relative to a full moon, was maybe twice the moon or half the size of the moon, something along those lines. So we usually invite people to use a star, a planet, or a full moon as their measuring stick for how big it appeared to them to be.
Exactly. Let's go ahead and take a quick call, okay?
Yep.
All right. Caller, come on, button. Caller, good evening. Welcome to Fringe Radio. You're on with Peter Davenport.
Hey, Pat, it's Bill in New York.
Bill, how are you,
Peter,
my friend?
Good, I'm doing great. Peter, an absolute honor and privilege, and it's my pleasure to actually have a chance to speak with you.
Well, thank you, Bill. Thanks for your call in, and thanks to you and to all of our audience for even just paying attention. Sometimes it's...
Well, actually, Peter, I made a report to you at newfork.org back in '95. It was the summer. And I had reported to you that I had seen a triangular or boomerang-shaped object in New York City. I was living in the Bronx at the time. And it had gone toward the city that night. And then you contacted me a few days later, and you said that many people had seen this object. It was seen from New York City up the Hudson River all the way to Canada. Now, I live currently in the Hudson Valley region in upstate New York. And this area was known for the triangular objects and craft. And it's incredible because as of September 18th of last year, I actually picked up an object that had 3 lights on it. It was curving upward. It stopped very briefly and then zoomed off. Now, I've been a sky watcher now for a year, along with my friend Eric in Boston. And there's a lot of activity going on. You know, I think it's important for a lot of people to get more involved with the skywatch aspect, get their cameras out there and start trying to get video of these craft. My question to you is there still a rash of these sightings with the triangular or boomerang-shaped objects in the Northeast or in general the United States or even worldwide?
Worldwide. You bet there are. And I get those reports all the time of triangular objects either streaking overhead or seen hovering in the night or daytime sky. Get those reports all the time. And if you're interested in triangular-shaped objects in particular, I would encourage you to get a copy of the book by Dave Marler. He now lives in Albuquerque. Just a year ago or so, he published a book focusing on reports of triangular UFOs, and he did a wonderful job. He's a meticulous investigator and reporter of fact, and you might enjoy his book immensely. Bill, do you remember the date of your sighting, or even just the month?
June 10th, but you know what? Unfortunately, I went on your site, and I couldn't find it in the database.
Well, if you didn't submit it using our online report form, did you mail it to the center?
No, I think I did do it online back in '95, and I did actually receive an email from you a few days later where you said that many people seen it from all walks of life.
Yeah.
You're not the only one. It was seen from New York, like I said, New York City, up the Hudson River into Canada.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking of 2 cases in particular. There was a very dramatic sighting seen from the Staten Island Ferry on Friday night, the 15th of September, 1995. If you saw yours on June 10th, of course, those are 2 separate sightings. There was also another very dramatic sighting on November 17th, 1995. An object streaked down the east coast of the United States. It was seen from Maine to Georgia. Very dramatic sighting. You can see the reports on our website. But I'm going on memory now, Bill. I don't think we had our online report form set up in June of 1995. We don't have your report.
I might have just emailed you directly.
Yeah.
Well, and back then, I mean, you're talking the infancy of the internet. Realistically, I mean, that's when things were just starting to kind of churn. You know.
Yeah.
And you know what's great, that Peter actually had that site available at that time. You know, in this early days of the internet, for people to actually make these reports, or at least be able to contact him to discuss this. Because honestly, there wasn't much of an outlet for people at that time, you know, that had experiences. You know, New Fork was actually one of the first avenues where people can actually go to and speak to people about this, like Peter. So actually, Peter was like what spurred my whole interest, because it just has taken off from speaking with Peter at that time on, because I became so interested with the UFO phenomenon, and that's why I'm involved with the sky watching. And I think Pat, I think, and Peter, I think it's so important that people need to be paying more attention to what's going on in the skies. Really,
I do too. I commend you for your view, and I have a similar view, of course, and that's what keeps me going, serving as director of the UFO Center and working harder than I've ever worked in my life to try to bring the truth to the American people, as opposed to leaving them exposed to what the U.S. government wants them to believe about the UFO phenomenon.
Exactly. Yeah, you know what else? You hear all this about the black op, top secret craft that it could be, maybe the stealth bomber in its inception, it's okay. I will definitely say that it's a high probability that a lot of these sightings could be that, but that you cannot discount the percentage that it is not.
Yeah. I don't think many sightings are caused by U.S. military or intelligence platforms or hardware. It just seems unlikely, particularly given that there are cave paintings going back 12 or 13,000 years that are suggestive of UFO sightings, discs with lines radiating out from them and strange creatures with helmet-like structures over their heads. So I think this phenomenon has been going on for a long, long time.
I totally agree. Now, do you think there's an issue today with drones being sighted and being counted as some type of extraterrestrial craft?
I don't think so. Drones don't fly around our backyards. They're usually high-altitude craft. And also, it's important to bear in mind that a drone is nevertheless just an airplane. The only difference between a drone and an airplane is a drone doesn't have a pilot in the front end of it.
Right.
So I think a person is no more apt to mistake a drone for a UFO as he is to mistake an aircraft for a UFO. It used to be people said, well, they're weather balloons, and then they were crash dummies, and then they were swamp gas, and then they were satellites, and so on and so on and so on. Drones are just the most current manifestation of that assumption on the part of everybody that if they can't identify it, it must have been put there by the government.
Yes. Well, Peter, an absolute pleasure to speak with you tonight. And I just want to ask one last question. We can submit video to newfork.org, right, of any visual, recorded...
You can. What we invite people to do is submit a detailed written report of their sighting and then send the video. If it's larger than 15 megabytes, we can't accept it via email. We invite people to put their video on YouTube or somewhere on the internet, and we will then include the link to their video in their report so people can read their report and then click on the link and go to the video and watch it.
Great. Thank you, Peter, so much for taking the time. Pat, it was a pleasure speaking with you again, my friend.
All right.
And Peter, keep going on with the work. You're an inspiration personally to myself. And keep up the great work. And I will be sending a submission very shortly. So, again, absolute pleasure to speak with you tonight.
Yeah, thank you, Bill, and thanks for your continued attention on the subject, and thanks for your call tonight. Great talking.
Have a great night, guys.
Take care, Bill. Keep warm.
Yes. Bye-bye.
All right, everybody. Welcome back to Fringe Radio. Our guest tonight is Peter Davenport. He is the director of the National UFO Reporting Center. When did the reporting center, Peter? When did this site come into existence, or this organization come into existence?
Yeah, it's been almost 41 years ago, Pat. Hard to believe. I was not involved in its foundation or its inception. That was the result of a retired Seattle firefighter. His name is Robert J. Gribble, who in 1974 retired from the Seattle Fire Department, and he had been fascinated with UFOs for 30 years at that point. He had met George Adamski, for example, and invited him to Seattle to speak here in Washington State, sort of the home of ufology, after the Ken Arnold sighting of June 24th, 1947. And Bob said, you know what I'm going to do in my retirement is set up a UFO hotline such that if there's a sighting anywhere in the United States, a person will have a place to call where the information, he can tell his story, where the information will be preserved, and it will be made available to investigators and to members of the press, and most important, to the public. So he set it up in October of 1974. Ironically, that's just about the time that I came to live in the state of Washington, in Seattle, to go to grad school. I came there, or arrived in Seattle in September of 74, and Bob ran the hotline until the summer of 1994, 20 years. Now that I've done it 20 years myself, I can understand why he was so exhausted by it. And one night in July of 1994, a friend told me he thought that Bob was going to shut down the hotline. He'd had enough of it. And I made the mistake of calling Bob Gribble and saying, you know, Bob, that's a job that I would consider helping you with in order to keep the hotline open. And he said, Peter, it's yours. And if I had known what I was doing, Pat, to my personal life and to my outlook on what reality is, I think I would have turned my back on Bob's generous offer and declined it and not gotten involved, because it has just taken over my entire life. I work 2 shifts a day, 7 days a week, to allow members of the public, not just in the United States, but because of the international nature of the telephone and the internet systems, anywhere from around the world, people can submit reports, and they do, from Europe, from Africa, most of all South Africa, from Asia, Japan, South America. We have reports from all around the world now. That's the one nice thing that the Internet has done to ufology.
It's opened it up worldwide.
It sure has.
Without a doubt. Do you get, I would assume the phone calls and the information that you get is got to be, I'm sure there's, like with anything, there's people that have nothing better to do, and there's the hoaxsters and there's the pranksters, and then I'm sure people that see things that, you know, they just need to take a little clearer look at. Do you get some of those, though, in all honesty? Do you get some that are just unbelievable, and you can tell, I would assume you can tell just by the way people talk with you, whether they're acting or whether they're really serious?
Sure, it's the majority of calls. Yeah. It's the most exhausting part of my job, is putting up with children's prank calls. One of my greatest problems, I would say, on a typical day, somewhere between 20 and 50% of the calls are from hoaxsters who have nothing better to do than make life difficult for somebody else. And many of those calls, Pat, tragically, are from very young kids, male and female, who call the hotline and just spew quadruple X-rated profanity.
Oh, man.
I don't know what has happened to our country, to the young people, but it makes me angry. And
and you know, not to get off the subject, but there's no respect for anybody anymore. The way the kids talk to, matter of fact, I was in the store today, and the way some of these young kids talk to the parents, or when you see a parent negotiating with a 4-year-old, things have changed.
Yeah, they sure have.
And not for the good.
My job would actually be enjoyable and much more productive if I didn't have to put up with these calls. And then, of course, there are people who are somewhat deranged or who are taking drugs of either legal or illegal, and it affects their behavior and outlook and so on. But I keep doing it because there are a lot of very good people, very sincere-minded people, who see things that they cannot explain, and they want to find out what it is they saw. And only very rarely am I able to help them identify it, but we like to preserve that data, that information, and which otherwise would not be preserved if there were not a hotline and a website that allows them to do so. and all that information is lost. Here's an interesting factoid that you and our audience might find almost too hard to believe, but it is my estimate, after 20 years of having, almost 21 years of having run the hotline, it is my estimate that out of 20,000 Americans who see a UFO, or what likely was a UFO, what they think, they believe was an honest-to-golly alien spacecraft, out of 20,000 sightings, only one of those witnesses will ever write it down.
Really?
Isn't that odd? Only one of them, actually I misspoke, only one out of about 20,000 is my estimate, and it's only an estimate, of course. Only one out of 20,000 people will ever come forward and report it to an organization like ours. Now, out of the people who call our hotline, these are what I perceive to be legitimate reports, not prank or hoax calls. I estimate that out of 100 people who call the hotline with a serious-minded report of a UFO sighting, only somewhere between 20 and 50 of them who say they're going to submit a written report will ever do so. Wow. Apparently, writing it down is just too difficult for most Americans. Very sad statement on the American public.
Yeah.
So we're catching only about 1 out of 100. If my 20% estimate is correct, we're capturing only about 1 out of 100,000 UFO sightings.
The sightings, what are people sending in, Peter? I mean, is it do you get a lot of phone? And I'm sure it goes all over the gamut. But do you get everything from flying saucers to orbs to little blinky lights? I mean, is it just all over the place?
All over the map. I think I've heard everything I can possibly imagine, Pat. In fact, just on Friday of this week, 2 days ago, I received a very nicely written report from a gentleman in Maryland. He said in the year 2002, in fact, it was February 2nd, 2002, I remember the date, so it makes it 020202. He and his wife were down in the French West Indies on a tennis court, and they allege to have seen a cylindrically shaped object. I don't yet know how big it was. It was pronouncedly red, and it zipped around them, and it went through a solid wall without slowing down. We hope to have that report, hope to get a report from the gentleman. He just sent me an email. I'm going to try to get him to submit a formal statement using our online report form. And I hope we have that posted within the next week or so. But one of the more interesting sightings, or types of sightings, I should say, is these red, orange, and yellow fireballs, clusters of them, up to 200, that have been reported to us for many years, but I think I did an approximation recently, 12,000 such reports in the last 2.5 years. And I frequently talk to people in MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, and they agree with me. They're getting the same type of report. So it's not some kind of bias on my part that is causing these reports. People are seeing these things, and we have absolutely no idea what they are. They concern me a little bit, Pat, because they clearly are not from this planet. The only exception to that statement is they might be, some of the cases might be ascribable to the launching of Chinese lanterns or so-called sky lanterns that have a pyrotechnic device in them, and people launch them at memorial ceremonies and festivities of one type or another. But not all of them. And in some cases, people will report that the objects just streak across the sky and go over the horizon in a matter of seconds. Clearly, that is not some kind of floating sky lantern with a pyrotechnic device in it. One of the more dramatic types of sightings of this nature was submitted by an ex-U.S. astronaut. He lives in Athens, Texas, which is about 70 miles southeast of Dallas, Texas. It was the 5th of July, 2013, so almost 2 years ago. People can see his report on our website. He was standing outside with his wife. He was facing west. She was facing to the east. They were at their home in Athens. And his wife said, "Honey, what's this?" And he turned around to face the east just in time to see a red or a red-orange object streak right over his head.
Huh.
And while he was watching the first one, his wife said, "Here comes another one." And he looked back to the east, and here comes a second red light following, it appeared, the same flight path that the first one had taken. All told, the two of them stood there and watched 6 of them go right over their heads. Very, very interesting sighting. A very similar sighting from Glendale, Arizona on the 28th of September, 2013. This is a report submitted by a retired Arizona Highway Patrol officer who saw, he estimates, between 150 and 200 of them.
Wow.
And if people have an interest in looking at our data, they can just go to the website, go to any month's sightings, and some days, some months, we get up to 1,200 sightings a month. That is roughly 40 a day. I would say a good half of them are reports of that nature, sightings of clusters of red, orange, and yellow fireballs. We have no idea what they are.
It's in the orbs. I mean, that seems to be the kind of the hot thing right now that people are seeing. Matter of fact, here in Salt Lake City, we finally got a MUFON director, which her name is Erica Lucas. She has been doing investigations forever, and she just took the directorship of MUFON for the state of Utah. And she has just been getting several reports where these orbs, if you will, fly over the valley. They move up and down the valley, side to side. In some cases, people are reporting them hovering for upwards of an hour. But yet they seem to be somewhat translucent, too.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what she's getting. I would have to take it case by case, of course, but the important thing in an instance like this, when you're having repeat sightings, is to organize a group of people such that whenever anybody sees one or more of these objects, they immediately call everybody else. So everybody can go outside. Everybody is looking at the object at the same time.
Right.
And they can measure or record where they're located and measure the direction they're looking. And if everybody does that at the same instant, that allows you to triangulate on the object and calculate how far away from you it is. Once you know how far away from you it is, you can start making estimates of its actual dimensions.
And get it from different angles, from different places all around where people can get a little different look at it.
Absolutely, and measure not only the azimuth or direction, but measure the angle of elevation, how high up above the horizontal plane. Once you have those figures, you can apply your training in trigonometry that we all got in high school and start calculating how high the object is, how far away from you it is, how big it is, and therefore how fast it might be moving or whether it's stationary. But you have to have data from multiple vantage points in order to be able to do that, of course.
Well, and it sounds like, Peter, what you do too is you not only take these reportings, but you help educate people as well.
Yeah.
Because again, there's so many things you see in the sky. For me, I get what's the most common UFO out there is the planet Venus. I never saw Venus until this summer, early in the morning, going to work down south when I had to go work somewhere else at a different location, and that's what it looked like. It looked like a sparkling thing in the sky that was quite low over the tops of the mountains, and yet that's what it was. We have got to take an NBC News break. Can we keep you for another go-around?
Absolutely. I allotted 2 hours for this. That's what we agreed upon, and so I'd be happy to hang on and talk some more.
Sounds great. Our guest tonight is Peter Davenport. He is the director of the National UFO Reporting Center. www.nuforc.org. You can go check it out.